Welcome to episode 1 of Live from Occupy City Hall. Even though this is not being filmed live, it is an extension of a series that was once filmed live that the May 30th Alliance did outside of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois. And so we're going to stick with the name of that original series, even though this is a continuation that will be pre-recorded and then released and probably edited in some shape or fashion. What we want to do with this series is regularly communicate with the city about issues that are going on locally, issues that are going on nationally, issues that are going on globally, and articulate how all of those issues are interconnected with each other. Let's begin by talking about the officer-involved shooting that took place in Rockford, Illinois on September 24th, 2022, when 17-year-old Trayvion Bowman was shot in his back by a police officer inside of his home. Trayvion Bowman is currently in critical condition at the hospital. We are hoping and praying that Trayvion Bowman survives. But besides the generic and typical sentiments of hope and prayers, we want to mobilize and organize around what has taken place and what has happened to Trayvion Bowman. Trayvion Bowman is the third person who has been shot by the Rockford Police Department this year. The previous two people both did not survive the shooting. The first person who was shot was a man named Bradley Tompkins outside of the Rockford Casino. The second person who was shot was a man named Peter Yeager inside of his home. Now, each Peter Yeager, Trayvion Bowman, and Bradley Tompkins have varying stories, have different life experiences, different situations and circumstances. But the commonality is that each one of these people were in situations where they needed help, where they needed assistance, and instead of getting those things, they got bullets. And that is why we have to have the conversation of not just individual incidents. One of the main things that happens after one of these shootings is people begin to pick apart the individual incidents and the individual events in an effort, maybe consciously or subconsciously for some people, to cast blame upon the victim, to cast blame upon the person who has been shot by the police. So that way, I don't know if that makes people feel as if it's better if they did something that, or if there's specific things you're looking for that qualifies them deserving to be shot by the police or not. But you see it in the comments initially after each one of these people were shot, Peter Yeager, Bradley Tompkins, and now Trayvion Bowman. People come in the comments on news stations and they justify it. They share posts and they justify it. They use the light reactions and laugh at the shooting. And I think, of course, there is a section of people who do this for attention or vindictive reasons or some type of prejudicial reasons. But we do also have a section of people that are, when it comes to some of these comments, who are just uninformed and just ignorant about the difference between an institutional issue and an individual issue. And because I was not there when Trayvion Bowman was shot, we're still waiting for body camera footage to be released. If it will be released, the state's attorney released the names of the officers. I'll pull that up here in a second. But as I've done multiple times before after someone has been shot by the police here in Rockford, the most important thing we can do is put our attention on the institution and on the institutional causes that led to this shooting. Because we understand that we in this city don't have the collective power yet to even do anything to hold this individual accountable, because you need to be able to have power to hold the individual accountable, and of course you need even more power to hold the institution accountable. But what we can do in these situations is, instead of trying to go straight to attaching this issue to a police officer or the officer that's involved, attaching it to the department that's involved, because we see that this has happened to multiple different people. It's a devaluing of life that starts at the root of the system. On September 24th, they didn't value Trey Bowman's life. When Peter Yeager was encountered, when Bradley Tompkins was encountered, these people's lives were not valued. And maybe the individual police officers on the scene believe that they valued these people's lives, but the institutional procedures, the institutional policies that they have in place are ones that don't value these people's lives. So as we sit here today on September 27th, 2022, 1,048 people have been shot and killed by the police in the last 365 days. And that's something that you can look up at the WashingtonPost.com. They have, I usually just go into Google and type Washington Post officer involved shootings. And I got the link saved, so it's a little different. But my point in saying that is that this is open information. This is free information. One of the first steps we have to take, and when we start speaking about dealing with institutional issues, is gathering information about these institutions, gathering data and statistics about these institutions, so that way we have empirical evidence that we can use to base our ideologies and base our platforms on. And so 1,048 people means that on an average, 3 people a day are shot and killed by police, by law enforcement in this country. And that's aside from how many people die in custody. And here in Winnebago County, 2 people in this year have died inside the Winnebago County Jail. The conditions inside the Winnebago County Jail are known to be inhumane and intolerable. And year after year, people die inside the jail. People who have not had their day in court, have not been found guilty, people who are still in the process of dealing with allegations, and they die from in the inside of the jail, from one way or another, in a way that if they were not inside the jail, they would not have died. And again, that's when we start getting back to institutional accountability. That's the danger in trying to place these issues solely on individual police officers or individual correctional officers, because then when something like in custody death happens, there is no specific individual maybe that you can put it on. It may be multiple people's negligence. It may be the policies and the procedures negligence. And that's why when we speak about institutional issues, institutional causes, what we're talking about is policies and procedures. When we start speaking about the fact that 80% of police officers live outside of Rockford, that work inside of Rockford, that is something that gives you an understanding of the mentality of the people who are on the Rockford Police Department. These aren't people who, it's not even about viewing themselves as part of the community when it comes to the Rockford community or the city community, whatever your terminology for community or whatever your meaning for community is in Rockford. They can't view themselves as that because they don't even live in the same location. They're in a different locale. So I think that there is a larger conversation to be had about the shooting of Trey Bowman, the individual events that led up to the shooting of Trey Bowman, the police officers who shot Trey Bowman, the way in which the city of Rockford government has handled the shooting of Trey Bowman, the way in which the Rockford Police Department, Winnebago County State's Attorney, Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force, all have handled the shooting of Trey Bowman. But I think right now, what I'm asking people to do is to take the time to have a conversation or to think about the bigger causes that led to the shooting of Trey Bowman institutionally. Think about the bigger things that have led to 3 people being shot, because it was 3 different sets of officers, 3 different sets of events that happened in each one of these times, and all 3 of these people were failed. I would also ask people to please share some of the posts that the May 30th Alliance have put out to raise awareness about the individual shooting of Trey Bowman, with the understanding that it's not simply about whether you agree or disagree with certain things that Trey Bowman did in that moment or at that time or did before those moments. It's about believing that human life is valuable. So we want to advocate for justice for Trey Bowman. We want people to please share any information about Trey Bowman, not just one time or not just two times, but every time you see it on your feed, every time you get a chance to interact with it, engage with it, so that way we can get more people knowing what it is that has happened, not just to Trey Bowman, but also to Peter Yeager, also to Bradley Tompkins, before them to Faustin Guaitigo, to Jose Gonzalez Jr., to Denzel Duvant, to Tyrus Jones, and to the countless other people who have been victims of violence at the hands of law enforcement in Winnebago County. One of the things people say a lot of times after one of these officer-involved shootings take place and a black person is shot by the police is, what about black-on-black violence? Here in Rockford, Illinois specifically, they'll say, well, what about the west side of Rockford? Or what about the shooting that happened on this street or that street? And I find it interesting that the response to advocating about one murder or one tragedy is, well, what about another tragedy? Because by that case, then the only tragedy that actually matters is the very first tragedy that ever took place. And whoever was the first person to have their son killed or their child die or have their mother die, father die, be killed, these are the people who hold the true claim to tragedy and to advocation. If we're going by priority based on whataboutisms, and if we're giving priority to different types of killings, like if you're saying that addressing black on black killings is more important than police killings or officer involved shootings, then by that case, does that stand true for crimes that happen or killings that happen with white people? When white people are shot and killed by the police, the response can't be, well, what about black on black violence? Because these aren't black people doing it. I've never seen in the last here specifically 3 people have been shot by police. 2 of them have been white men. I didn't see anybody in the comments say, well, what about white on white violence? When we spoke about these people or when we advocated for these people, that was never a response that you got. And so I think that it's important for us to have conversations about why black on black violence, the concepts of black on black violence, the concept inter-community violence exist. And those things exist because black people have been marginalized generationally through centuries. It is not a coincidence that the south side of Chicago and the west side of Rockford are in the conditions that they are in. Those were strategic decisions that were made by people in power. And again, when we start speaking about institutional things, when we start speaking about root causes, you have to begin to not ask about what is the reason individual acts of violence happen. We have to start talking about the reason that violence persists and exists in this country at the level as it does. And part of that is the amount of guns that are in flow in this country. When you have this many guns in flow and this many people have access to guns, these are the things that inevitably happen. You have large amounts of gun crime. Gun crime is an issue in America. And the reason that it's important that we speak about the gun crime and the gun part of it is because there are people who profit off of these guns being created. There are people whose business models, whose livelihood is all about the creation and the production and the selling of guns. There's people in legislation and law offices and politicians who have those seats because of gun companies and gun businesses and gun production. And The people who make the most money off these guns are not the same people who are using these guns, or the same people whose families are victims to these guns. And so again, that's a deeper conversation to be had, that it is mostly white men who make money off of these guns being created, and it is mostly black families who are traumatized by the creation of these guns. And then one of the other things we have to talk about when you start speaking about drugs being sold and whatever violence comes with the drug market, you have to speak about the poverty that exists and the desperation that exists in these areas, that have existed in these areas for decades upon decades, in some places for over a century. Purposely, these are not accidental things. That's why it's so important that we're informed about these issues, so that we don't perpetuate these false narratives. This idea that black people have to value black lives. Black people do value black lives. When somebody black dies, who you think the people at the funeral are? That is a valuation of black lives. Who you think the stray bullets is hitting? That's a valuation of black lives. When black people get killed in Rockford, it's people whose lives are destroyed from it. But we have to ask the question, why do we have so many generations of black people who have dealt with these things in Rockford? And when you look across the other side of the city, or you look at other families, other places, other areas, they have not dealt with those same things. You can look at patterns of the areas where killings have happened in this city year after year after year in the same block radiuses. There's books that they talk about these things in all types of different cities, where you can look at certain block radiuses and there's a mass amount of the murders that happen, or a specific violence that happens. And those things persist in those areas because the cities allow it, because they don't value black lives. That poverty exists in black America because the United States of America does not value black lives, not because black people don't value black lives. We also have to begin to ask ourselves, why are we so desensitized? Why have we allowed it to become so normalized that 1,048 people are killed by the police in the last 365 days and nobody bats an eye about it? Collectively, or en masse, I should say. I shouldn't say collectively, en masse. In pockets and areas, at different moments, there are small waves. But what we're talking about is a consistent flow of these things happening. In Rockford, 3 have happened in this year. And they happen on a Monday, and by the time Friday gets here, it's nobody talking about it no more. But by the time Friday gets here, 30 more people have been shot and killed in different areas in the country. And so, again, we have to allow these issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, we have to allow these issues to be addressed in a systemic way, in a large way. And so when we look at how many people have been shot and killed by police, it's important to have a conversation about that. That's anchored in understanding. For some people, for some people, no number will be high enough. For some people, no number will be high enough. For others of us, no number will be low enough, as long as there is a number. But what we have to understand, I believe, the people who can articulate these things, who are willing to communicate these things to try to inform and educate people, is that this is such a small fraction of the actual trauma that is done, both physically and psychologically, because this is shot and killed. This doesn't count the amount of people who are shot and survive. This doesn't count the amount of people who die in custody. This doesn't count the amount of people who are tased to death, who may have a chokehold or something like that put on them. This doesn't count the amount of people who are in jail right now for things that they didn't commit, for crimes they didn't commit, or in prison for things that they didn't commit. People who are assaulted or beat inside of prisons or jails, people who are assaulted and beat by police. We have a statistic that says that 3 times a day, on average, the Rockford Police Department uses some type of force on citizens in the community. And so this is a small fraction. We allow this to be the way we begin the conversation, but we have to further.